Welcome everybody. This week we're going back into Mark's Gospel and we're reading Mark chapter 4 verses 35 to 41. Very well known story. That day when evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." That's the other side of the Lake of Galilee. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Well, this week in the southeast of England, our weather has gone from Wednesday with considerable heat, about 29 degrees Celsius, down to Friday, and it was no more than 16, and it was pouring with rain all day. There's been a risk of thunderstorms here, there, and everywhere, and we're kind of used to that idea, aren't we? That in this country, especially, that you might get a period of hot weather, and then eventually it'll be broken by a storm. Well, on the Sea of Galilee, with its particular local geography, they were used to sudden vicious storms or squalls appearing like the one in this story. However, they weren't welcomed like we might welcome a storm that breaks oppressive, humid heat. Because when these storms blew up out of nowhere on Galilee, they could be a threat to life, especially to those who made their living on Galilee from fishing. And our story from Mark depicts one such naturally occurring storm, just as all sorts of naturally occurring events can disrupt our lives and plunge us into fear, as it did Jesus' disciples here. But alongside the naturally occurring threat are some hints of something else too. Jesus and his disciples are striking out on a new stage of his kingdom of God mission. When Jesus says, "Let us go over to the other side," that's not an idle comment. It's not just like us saying, "Let's cross the road." Jesus wanted to go from the Jewish side of Galilee to the Gentile side. He wanted to go from the place where people sought to be true to the historic faith, although some of the most fiercely devout people, of course, opposed him, to a place where what was practiced would have been thought to be dodgy and often heretical. Not only that, it also says that they left the crowd behind. Fancy leaving behind all these followers that Jesus has built up. But he does. So imagine that for his disciples, this is about leaving behind the familiar and the successful for a venture into an area that didn't traditionally practice conventional and orthodox forms of faith. Jesus is extending the reach of the kingdom outside natural comfort zones. It's something we in the church often don't like to do either. We'd prefer to stay with people who are just like us, those with whom we feel safe. But the ministry of Jesus is rarely safe. And in that context, we might see the storm differently. And not least because when Jesus wakes on the boat and he responds to that desperate plea from his disciples, we read that he rebuked the wind and he said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." This is actually the sort of language that Jesus tended to use in exorcisms of demons. It's as if Jesus sees demonic opposition behind the storm, which is not surprising if this boat ride is a journey to extend the kingdom of God. Add to that the fact that Mark borrows some language here from Jonah chapter 1, where Jonah, the reluctant missionary, finds himself on a boat in a storm, and you have further evidence why it's not far-fetched to see a mission dimension and a resistance to mission dimension in this story. Maybe that's why we like to stay safe. We know that the call of Jesus may put us into tricky and risky situations. It will. But rather than saying, "No thank you, I'll stay at home," this story gives us reason to go on that risky adventure with Jesus. And so, given that we've got a natural storm, given that we've got a spiritual opposition dimension to it as well, I want you to have in your minds various things. For one thing, I want you to have in your minds any challenging call that you have on your life from Jesus. It might be the general challenge that most churches are facing now to navigate the new and uncertain world that we're moving into as hopefully we come through the COVID-19 pandemic. It might be, though, that Jesus is calling you or your church to a new form of outreach that's beyond your experience, or it involves people that you don't naturally like. So bear in mind those, but also bear in mind the ordinary storms of life, the things that throw us off course and trouble us, that can happen to anyone, regardless of whether they have faith. You know, when serious illness or bereavement or job losses or problems in our families come and buffet us, have in mind any of those storms too. The ordinary storms and the spiritual storms, if you like. Well, into those storms come two truths about Jesus that we can hold on to. And the first of the two is that Jesus is present in the storm. He's there. He's present. You know, sometimes when we're in the middle of one of these storms in our lives, it feels like Jesus isn't present. Or we might acknowledge his presence in theory, but to all practical ends, it feels like he isn't there, or that he might as well not be. I suppose it was something like the latter with the disciples here. They knew he was there, but he was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion, and maybe we can identify with them, waking him and saying, "Master, don't you care if we drown?" Perhaps we should ponder then from this story what it means when we know that Jesus is present with us in the storm, but we aren't hearing much from him. Could it be the equivalent in our lives to when Jesus is asleep on the boat in the story? But rather than that indicating his lack of care for us, could it be actually a sign to us that Jesus' attitude is, "It's all right, I've got this"? Could it be that Jesus is quiet in our storms because he is saying to us through his silence, I know that sounds like a contradiction in terms, that we don't need to fear? Could it be that this is an occasion where Jesus shows his will for us, not in his words, but in his example? He's not afraid of the storm, and we don't need to be either. That seems to me to be the message of him sleeping on the boat in the storm. Now, over many years on this subject, I've often quoted the words of a song by an American singer who at the time went under the name Leslie Phillips. Nothing to do with the British comedy actor of Ding Dong fame, and besides, Leslie Phillips is female, and furthermore has since changed her name to Sam Phillips. But she wrote a song many years ago called Answers Don't Come Easy. And the chorus, I think, speaks into this. She says, "Oh, I can wait. It's enough to know you can hear me now. I can wait. It's enough to feel so near you now. And when answers don't come easy, I can wait." And so I want to assure you that whatever storm you are facing, whether it's the risky adventure of following Jesus out of our comfortable church existence into mission in the world, or whether it's a painful life crisis, He is with you. His silence speaks, and His silence tells you that even as the elements rage, He's still there. It's okay. And I invite you to find the silent speaking of Jesus in the storm, because He is present. And that really leads on to the second thing I want to share with you that I hope will help you, and it's to say that Jesus is in charge during the storm. He is in charge of what happens. You know, when Jesus gets up and He stills the storm, some English translations put it that He says, "Peace." Well, that sounds terribly nice, doesn't it? But actually, the Greek word used here is not the word for peace. If it were, it would, trivia fact of the week, it would be the word Irene. It's the word from which we get the female name, Irene. Next time you meet a woman called Irene, you know that her name means peace. But it's not the word here. And the NIV translation that I used gets a better flavour when it says He rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." You hear that sense of authority in those words? The natural elements are given a telling off by Jesus. It's like even the elements are in disobedience to Him somehow, but He commands their obedience as their creator. You might say His words sound a bit like He's addressing naughty children and giving them a dusting down. But it's stronger than that word rebuked. And the particular words, like I said earlier in the introduction, these are exorcism words. So every part of creation, not just human beings, is commanded to come under obedience to Christ. And one day, as Paul told the Philippians, every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Or as Charles Wesley put it in his hymn, Jesus the Name High Over All, angels and men before it fall, and devils fear and fly. Now you may say that day isn't here yet, or you may say that day isn't here yet in my life because the storm is still raging. We don't always see the storm calming down, and we don't always see it calming down immediately. So I can understand that thought. The kind of dramatic intervention by Jesus that happens in our story isn't always an everyday occurrence, is it? Although maybe sometimes we're a little too reticent to ask for it. No, we are not yet at that time that Paul prophesied to the Philippians, where every knee will bow. And so in the meantime, sometimes Jesus saves us from the storm immediately. Sometimes He saves us from it over a period of time. But sometimes He saves us through the storm. But rest assured of one thing: the storm will not have the final word. Jesus will. Why? because we are a people of resurrection faith. So, in conclusion this week, how might we respond when we are in a storm? Well, if we can appreciate that Jesus is present, even if silent, and if we can believe that he is in charge, even as we wait for the fullness of his kingdom, then I pray that our faith and trust in him will grow, and that we shall not hear him say to us, as he said to those first disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Instead, while they then wondered and pondered when they said, "Who is this? Even the wind and waves obey him," may we know exactly who he is, and therefore may our wondering turn into worship, may our pondering turn into trust. So God bless you all. Hope to see you again next week. Bye-bye.